if you have kids, what can you do to sort of, I realize they're gonna form their bad habits no matter what, and you can't force your kids to be like little soldiers or anything, but
Yep.
what can you do to sort of help maybe prevent a little bit of it?
Play.
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 Yeah, that makes sense.
As much as you could possibly
That's
do.
a great answer.
So it's a very common thing that's happened, and there is some indications that it's starting to change. But we have a lot of people who are afraid of kids getting hurt.
Yeah, we do.
And that, unfortunately, is where kids learn physically how to move, how to get balance, how to get coordination. And what I see, I remember this very clearly. I had a patient, this was probably 10 to 12 years ago, and he was an exceptionally good baseball pitcher. What was weird is he didn't know how to cross midline. And what that means is to take your right hand and put it on the left side. So when he would go up to throw, he was so stiff and his whole body would turn as like one unit instead of the big rotations that we have.
Really?
And that's because he never learned how. And it's like it's overcoaching somebody how to move instead of. And my kids went to a school called the Waldorf School, and it was this brilliant game to count. And they had a little stick, and they had to reach with their right hand to grab the stick. So they had to cross midline, grab it, and hand it to the next person while they were counting. So their brain's going like mad, and the motor control of it. They knit. So knit is fine motor. So my kids have beautiful penmanship, which no one gives a crap about anymore, but they have coordination, and their games are all designed for that. But beyond that, not most, but it was a very popular thing if you had a child that was good in soccer to have them play soccer all the time. And it's one of the worst things to do. There's higher injury rates for people that do one sport all year round. In my day, I rode a bike. So I learned to ride that bike my dad made for me. We had a little hill by our barn, and I was like literally 4 or 5 years old. And I went up on this little hill. I held on the handlebars and I coasted down and ran into the wall. I fell over. I put the bike back up, and I did that repeatedly until I could turn away and balance myself for a little bit. And then I tried to pedal and fall over. And in one day, I taught myself to ride a bike. Now, I might be exaggerating, maybe it was 2 days, but it was a very short amount I taught myself. So I got the coordination, I got my rhythmical movement and things like that. And I would climb trees and I would jump out of trees. And I mean, my brothers, we all played sports and things like that. And one big one is on a hay wagon, taking a bale of hay. There's like a 6-inch gap that we're stepping on. The baler's in front of us. The bale's coming out. We're standing on this little balance beam, a staggered stance, diagonally reaching to grab this hay, lifting it up over our head to put it up on top of there, and realizing the coordination, strength, core strength that it takes to do that. And I have a friend who he's my height, and he can bench press like 273 pounds was what his like workout was. My maximum was like 250. And yet on a basketball court, I could throw him around. It's like a bale of hay.
Yeah.
Because I had a center of gravity, I had balance, I had coordination and things like that. And that's what kids need. Yeah. They need to go out, play, run on rocks, jump off of them. And, those kind of activities where a parent doesn't interfere. No, don't climb there. It's more, if you're going to interfere at all, then just be smart here. So you don't let your kid walk out in front of a car, but you don't have to freak out either. You can just say there's cars coming by, so every time you come here, you got to look. And that kind of thing, enough repetition, a kid's going to understand. They're going to look. If you freak out, then they get that reaction. Yep. And there's so many. My son was playing soccer, and there's 2 stories I'll tell you. There was one boy, and he was a little bit on the heavy side, and he did not know how to run. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. He had like this stiff shuffling kind of thing was how he ran. And I couldn't figure it out. Like I told you, I love watching people move. I couldn't figure out what the hell the kid was doing. And during one of the games, I was always the assistant. I never wanted to be the head coach. So I could make sure kids were getting subbed in so kids played equally. I always felt in like rec soccer, you should have everybody playing. It shouldn't be like the best kids out there all the time. And so I try to sub in everybody equally and distribute them around the field. And I remember the mom coming over to me and being upset because he was out of breath. And I was thinking to myself, like, I was literally perplexed. Like, he's playing soccer. He's been running. I'm not sure what you're talking about. I think he needs a break. He's winded or something like that. I'm like, it's soccer. You're supposed to run. You're supposed to be winded. He was like 10 years old. And that's a problem. That mother is the problem. And the other little boy had zero interest in soccer. And the mother saw that I was talking and playing with some of the kids, and she wanted me to coach her son to play soccer. And I remember thinking to myself, but right now he's like 9 or 10 years old. He just run. It's fine. He doesn't need to know every skill development type of thing. And I said, if I get a minute, I'll show him. But he was literally the kid that was picking the flowers and stuff. Zero interest in soccer. And the mom wanted him to play soccer so bad. He hated it. And all that did was teach him, I'm never going to play soccer again. And it's those kind of things, like, it doesn't make any sense. If a child's express interest, feed it to them. They want to do this sport, go for it. Every sport you can possibly imagine. Get mom and dad out of the loop. And if they can't do that, my brother's a phys ed teacher, and there's all kinds of information about this. And as a physical therapist, motor development is so important. And the playground is a time for play. And in schools, we reduce the playtime down to 20 minutes. And the kids, we know this though. We know that after exercise, they get their heart rate up. They're better focused. Their retention is better. Everything academically is better. Back to the Waldorf school, the kids went out multiple times a day. My wife is from Denmark. After a main lesson, every child goes out after one lesson for 45 minutes before the next lesson. Every lesson. So if you have 2 lessons in a day, 3 lessons in a day, you got a 45-minute gap in the middle where you're outside running around. There is no in day in Denmark. They have rain suits because it rains all the time. They're out, doesn't matter. They don't have snow days. My wife couldn't figure out. She actually took our kids to school on a snow day because she didn't know there was such a thing. And she went to the school, and the janitor's like, there's no school today. She's like, why not? He's like, it's snowing out. She's like, oh, okay. And the other time she did it was cold. It was like below 0 or something like that. So she got the kids all bundled up. We had these huge down blankets, and they would ride we had an old-fashioned stroller. That's what they use in Denmark, but they have like mountain bike tires on them so they can go over any terrain. So she's got these down blankets, all just little eyes here peeking out, and she walked them to school, not drive them, walked them to school. And they're like, "What are you doing here, lady?" And my wife was the one that was in the middle of winter riding her bicycle to the grocery store in snowstorms and stuff, and people were like, "What the hell's going on?"
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but take a look. The Danish population, healthy, active, relaxed. They're always in that top 5 of the happiest people in the world. Some of it's because they don't have to worry about healthcare. Some of it's because they have a place to live. But also it's the activity. These kids ride their bikes to school.
Yeah.
5 years old. The endorphins that come from the cardiovascular exercises, the chemicals that are released for pain control. By the way, you want to reduce your pain? Exercise. If you have depression, anxiety disorders, exercise works better than the medication. The medication has a shelf life, and there's people who need to be on the medication to get them over the hump so they can exercise, and they may need it to regulate things, but to depend on it. We know this. We absolutely know it from study after study, and yet, what do we recommend? Johnny's misbehaving, no recess.
Which is the worst thing to do.
And I have a teacher that she's a retired teacher, and when she had that child, she made him run. Go.
I was just gonna say, when you're misbehaving, go run. We had the 300. Go run the 300.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also I grew up in the 70s, so in the 70s and 80s. In the 70s, we went outside all the time.
I was just gonna say that because I grew up kind of right before everything kind of. Because I spent my childhood in the neighborhood. I remember my mom would whistle to get us to come home for dinner. And
my mom would kick us out of the house. Honestly, I remember being a kid and coming in complaining that I was bored.
Yeah.
And she said, great, I have chores. It took me one time to learn not to go in the house.
I had a moment once where I was driving to my parents' home, and I just realized, why are there no kids anywhere? There's no kids anywhere.
So my brother, he built basketball hoops. So again, this landfill, this is where we got all our supplies. So he went to the landfill, got a big metal pole, put a piece of plywood up on it, made a backboard, and then attached a rim to it. So the modern day portable basketball rims that all the kids have, my brother invented that in like the late 1970s, early 1980s, honestly. And so we had a gym teacher as a neighbor, and he had this metal pole that came up with this metal loop around it. It was a rebounding rim to practice pulling the ball out. We used it as a dunk hoop. So we'd have this metal pole in the middle of the court, and we had dirt court. So we had this line drawn around. That was the 3-point line. No backboard, anything like that. And it was probably 8 foot tall, so a lot of people could dunk on it. But there's a freaking metal pole, not attached to anything. It'd topple over on people. If you held on to it, it'd fall on you. So my brother built this backboard And so we had full court hoops. We had that metal pole and then a regular hoop.
It's awesome.
And it would topple over. My dad worked for Niagara Mohawk, so he had one of those big spools, and that would weight it down, still topple over. So my brother tied it to the barn. And so then we wanted to have 2 backboards. So he built another one. And we would have these tournaments at our house where kids would come over. We lived in the country, so we didn't have like a neighborhood group of kids. We had like 2 or 3 neighbors. But they would come to our house and we'd have these tournaments. And we would play physical basketball. So we would beat the hell out of each other and, going up to dunk the ball and getting knocked by 3 people because, if there was no blood, there's no foul. And it was just a really physical time. But then go on to a real basketball court. It's so mild. I'm the youngest, so I always had older brothers, and I had to go up against the older brothers. And so I was always playing against more physical things. But again, coordination, strength, agility, all that stuff, it came from play. It came from my brother going to the dump to get a metal pole to make this. My son, I went to play basketball the one time, and the rim wasn't level. He didn't want to shoot on it. I'm like, level rim? I had a metal pole, boy. Like, what are you talking about? But that is the generation for sure.
I love that answer about play because I don't know exactly how I got into it, but I was very interested in childhood psychology for a while, and I read a bunch on it. And one of the things they talk about is the importance of play. There's a self-help book that came out in 2018 that I read. A bunch of people I know read it. He's big on the internet. It's Jordan Peterson. He's 12 Rules for Life, and one of them is don't bother children when they're skateboarding. And I found that chapter very interesting. I have a lot of young cousins, and it kicked me off on this sort of search, and I read another book called The Coddling of the American Mind, and another book by another childhood psychologist, and all of them did talk about the importance of play from a million perspectives. Like they said you learn empathy through play because you have to. Kids are more motivated by play than almost anything. They'll do anything to play because it's what they love to do, and so in order to keep the game going. You have to worry about hurting another person, where in other situations you might not really need to.
When it's not structured.
Unstructured, which is the thing that I think is missing a lot. One of the books that I read was about, he mentioned how playgrounds are like unusable to children when they're there. It's like, why? Why? Just open it up.
We had contests to see who could launch themselves the highest off the swing.
Yeah, right.
Sure, we broke some bones. No,
but kids get hurt.
I know.
It is what it is.
And I do understand parents not wanting their kids to be bullied and unnecessarily treated poorly and things like that. I really do think I get that. And I can remember times growing up that there were times that kids were definitely getting treated poorly. And yet I also know what you said about the games. Like my brothers, I mean, they didn't let up on me, and they would have very strict rules and all that. But if I wouldn't play, then they were going to accommodate. It's just what you said, that there's an empathy there because they can see that it's pushing too far. So they had to learn that part.
Right.
They didn't do it a lot, but they did do it sometimes.
It's weird. I've said this to people because when I had this thought once, and it just shocked me, and it was that you can't learn empathy by being empathized with. Because if someone's always empathizing with you, you've given them no reason to care about you at all. But if somebody's a little more selfish, a little more like, well, I want to do this, and you have to find a way to coexist, you do have to empathize with them a little bit just to keep things in a cooperative mode. I remember I saw this video once on this school. I think it was somewhere in Asia. It was a round school, and they had classrooms all around it. And there was just free, and there was jungle gyms and everything. And the idea was, if you can't handle sitting here anymore, go play. And they found that the kids genuinely would just choose to go learn something because they had tired themselves out or had done what their body needed to do. It makes sense.
Have you heard the book Spark?
No. What?
It's about a phys ed teacher. I think he was in like Illinois or something like that. And he went to some kind of continuing education program, and they gave him heart rate monitors. And so he brought them back. They were free, so he had a whole bunch of them, and he tried to figure out how to implement them into his classroom. So at first what he did is he had people put them on, and he was just, checking, regulating them and things. And he learned that some of the kids that he thought weren't putting in an effort, their heart rate was actually really high. So they were putting in an effort to try to do what they were doing. So instead of him being critical of how they were doing things. He just made it, if you want an A, keep your heart rate at 60 to 70% of your maximum. And he would calculate with them and teach them how to do it. And if you wanted to B, that's all you had to do. You could do anything you wanted to do. You wanted to run in place, you could do it. You jumping jacks, you wanted to swim, whatever the activity was. And amazing thing happened. The discipline went to zero. No kids were getting in trouble. The academics went through the roof. So there was this big study with the U.S. compared to the rest of the world academically in sciences and math, and we did poorly. When he took the students from the school district out, they tested at number 1 and number 2 compared to the rest of the world. So it was one of those things like, is it because Americans are not as smart as the rest of the world? Is it because we're fat and lazy compared to the rest of the world? And then it's been duplicated multiple times where they've put this system into play at other schools, and the kids' academics go up, the discipline problems go down. And so he had a program where they'd come in before school and kids would start to show up before to run around and do exercise because they liked how it felt. And my brother, who's a phys ed teacher, he's opened the gym up, and he'll have before classes start in the morning, and he'll have kids that come in there too. And if you give, especially younger kids, if you give them the opportunity to run around and play, they're going to run around and play. And it's when we tell them not to or restructure it too much, we get in the way. But that book also talks about the unbelievable benefits of continuous heart rate, keeping it up. And it's good for like multitude of diseases. We mentioned the anxiety and depression, but it's also good for obviously your cardiovascular function, so your heart, your breathing, but it's good for other diseases too. It's good for cancers. It's like a whole slew of positive benefits that come just by getting your heart rate up. And then he has a follow-up book called Go Wild. I don't remember the author's name. And Go Wild talks about being in nature. And there's studies in Japan where they take these stressed out businessmen and they take them to a park for a retreat where they still are doing business things. But just by going to the park, they have a reduction in their stress levels for an entire month afterwards. And they have all kinds of data about the person who has the heart attack and goes into a room that has no plant compared to the one that only has a plant, the one that has a window looking outside and the one that doesn't. And their recovery rates, everything is so much better. And we know this. We know this in nursing homes with the older people. If they have a plant around, they survive better. If they have a window to look out, they do better. And we still make freaking rooms with no windows, no lights, and no plants. It's mind-boggling. And yet, if you go to Denmark again, what you'll see in their homes where they have the older people living, they're like little apartments with big windows, with lots of light coming in and plants everywhere. And I'm sure there's institutionalized things where they don't do that because it's more serious medical related. But if you have an older adult or you have someone in your life that's been going through a tough time, get them a plant. You see in my office, we have plants everywhere.
You do.
Yeah, it's intentional. And it's not just for that purpose, but it also is good for the air and cleans out the, our all the chemicals that are released. My God, there's so many things. There's a ton of books that I could refer you to that talk about the environmental problems that we have in the house and the carpets that we use and the plastics that we use and all that. And we're breathing this in all the time. And I know there's a big movement right now with this, our climate change, and really it's affecting us as well physically. We now know there's little pieces of plastic in every person, and what's going to happen to our body because of it. It's a new thing. Our body hasn't evolved to have this. So what the hell is going to happen? We don't know.